Hi everyone, in this video we are going to learn about is and not is operator. The main reason for making a separate video for the is and not is operator is that there is more content or more subject that we need to discuss about is and not is operator. So that's the reason I tried to make a separate video for this. So let us try to see examples and understand the concept. Here you can see in line number 5 we are trying to assign a value 10 to a variable x and assign a value 20 to a variable y. So what will happen, as we already know, the value 10 is stored in some container which is nothing but address, right? And the name of the variable, that is x, is tagged to it or tied to the address. In the sense, in the real world we try to tie, right? We try to tie a rope. In the same way, the variable name x is tied or tagged to this container. In the same way, the value 20 is stored in a container with the address, and the value y or the variable name y is tagged to this container or the address. So the address is nothing but, in the real world we will all live in a house. So the address of the house will uniquely identify where we live, whereas in the same way this address will uniquely identify the value that is stored. That is, here in this address we are storing the value 10. In the same way, here in this another address we are storing the value 20. So there is one more thing that we need to observe. Here we are trying to assign the value 10 to the variable x and value 20 to the variable y in the same line, followed by one after the another. But there is no rule that in the same way the addresses should follow one after the another. What I mean to say is that here, if the address of this variable x is some 101, then the address of this variable y is some 201. So there is no rule that these addresses should follow one after another, like 101, 102. There is no rule that they will follow the same order. So the addresses are given at random by the system. So keep that point in mind, that might help you in some cases. So now let us stick to our point. So here what we are trying to do, print x is y. We are trying to say that x is y. So what does this actually mean? We have seen something that is x equal to y. What this will do? We have seen this, right, previously. This is a comparison operator that is used to compare the value that is stored in the variable x with the value that is stored in the variable y. We have already seen this. But what does this is means? So actually the is means that it checks the address of the variable x with the address of the variable y. Instead of checking the value of the variable x with the value of the variable y, it tries to check the address of the variable x with the address of the variable y. That is, when you try to see that, for example, if you assume that the address given by the system to the variable x is 101 and the address given to the variable y by the system is 201, then when you try to check the both addresses, we can see that they are not equal. So that's the reason we are getting false here. The is operator is used to check whether the two variables are stored in the same address. But we can see that they are two different variables, so they are stored in different addresses, right? So that's the reason we are getting the output as false. And then when you are trying to perform x is not y, which is opposite to it, right? So then automatically that would be true. So this is the use of is and not is operators. Now let us try to see this is and not is operators in much more detail. Here in this line number 6, we can see that we are trying to assign the value 20 to both the variables. This value 20 is assigned to both these variables. So internally now what will happen? Let me show you. So internally the value 20 is stored in the address or a container, and then the variable x is tied to this address, and in the same way the variable y is also now tied to this address, because instead of assigning two different containers like this and assigning the value 20 to the two different containers and then tagging the variable x and tagging the variable y, instead of doing like this, the system tries to save the space and tries to assign the value 20 to both the variables, because the value is same, right? So that's the reason system tries to reduce the usage of memory and avoid this type of addressing and tries to do this type of addressing because the value is same. So now what will happen when you try to do x is y? Here you can see that I just have printed the line, right? So that's the reason we got 2020. Okay, now let us try to see what will happen if the x is y, because they are stored in the same address. For example, this is 101. Let us assume that. So when you try to perform x is y, we can see that we are trying to check whether the address of x is equal to address of y, that is 101, that is equal to 101. So that's the reason the output should be true, right? And we can see that the corresponding output is true. So this is what happens when you try to assign the same value 20 to the both the variables. So internally system tries to tag both the variables to the same address location of the container. So that's the reason we are getting true here. And when you are trying to perform x is not y, we can see that we are getting the corresponding output that is false. X is okay, Aman. We are trying to assign the same value to the both the variables. So that's the reason they are stored in the same address location. So what if one of the value that is x or y is changed, then what happens to the another value? You may got this question, right? Because the value 20 is stored in the same address location and the variables are tagged to the same location. What if you want to change the variable y? What will happen to the value of variable x? So that is a good question, right? You may got that question, right? So let us try to see what will happen. Here in this line, we can see that we are trying to change the value of y, that is y equal to y minus 2. So what will happen internally? Y is equal to, y value is 20, right? 20 minus 2, that is y is equal to 18. So we are trying to change the value to 18 from 20. So we are trying to change, right? Then what happens to the value of x? Let us try to print the x and y variables and let us try to see the output. We can see that the value of the x, that is 20, which is unchanged, and the value of the y, that is 18, which is changed. Now let us try to check whether the address of x is same as address of y. So when you try to check like this, we can see that the output is false. Why? Because whenever you try to change the value of y, then what the system will do? The system will try to remove this tag. It tries to break this tag and try to calculate the new value of y, that is 18, and tries to tag the variable y to this new address or container and store the value 18 in it. So when you try to see, the address may be some 301. So when you try to see the both addresses here, 101 and 301, some random values, let us assume that these are the addresses. So we can see that the both addresses are now different. So that's the reason we are getting false here. In the previous case, both are tagged to same container or the same address, but in this case, both are tagged to different containers because the value of the y is now changed. So that's the reason the addresses are not equal. So that's the reason we are getting the output as false here. And in the same way, when you are trying to perform not, then the address would be true. Now in the same way, here in this line, we can see that I have assigned the value 20 to the variable x and I have assigned the value 20 to the variable y. Instead of assigning the values in the single line like this, I tried to assign them in the different lines. Now let us try to see what will happen. We can see that the both values of x and y, when you try to print them, it is 20, 20. So in this case also the same thing is happening. The same thing that is happened in the previous case is happening. That is, the 20 is stored in some address or a container and the variable x and y are tagged to that address. So that's the reason we are getting true here. When you are trying to perform not, in the same way you are getting false here. So this is how the is and not is operator works in the case of numbers. Now let us try to see the same thing in the case of list. As I said previously, we will discuss the list concept in detail later. For now, let us assume that list is a group of values that are enclosed between the square brackets. For now, keep this concept like this. Instead of understanding the details about the list, let us try to understand it briefly. Here in this line number 8, we can see that a list containing the values 1, 2, 3 is assigned to a variable y and the variable x. So what will happen? A container or the address containing the list of values, that is 1, 2, 3, and then the variable x is tagged to it and the variable y is tagged to it, and this container is having some address, right? Let us assume that address is 222. So what will happen when you are trying to print x and y? We can see that the x and y got printed, and when you are trying to perform x is y, we can see that we are getting true because we are trying to assign the same list to the both the variables. So that's the reason we are getting the true here, because they are stored in the same address location. And then when you are performing x is not y, we can see that it is false. And now let us try to see what will happen if you try to change the value of x. Here this append method is used to add a new element to the list. So let us assume that we are adding some new element to the list. We will discuss this thing later in this session. For now, let us try to understand that append is a method used to add the value to the list. So what we are trying to do, we are trying to add a value 4 to the list that is stored in the variable x and y. But when you are trying to perform, as in the previous case, we will assume that this will happen. What will happen? We will assume that the variable y is now containing the value 1, 2, 3 and variable x is containing the value 1, 2, 3, 4, like in the previous case of numbers and strings. But here you can see that when I am trying to print both the variables x and y, we can see that the both values are same. Then there are also questions. In the previous case, the value that is changed, that is here is the variable x, right? The value that is changed should be changed, but the value that is not changed here should remain unchanged, right? Like this. But what's happening? The both values are getting changed. Why? This is the special case. Keep that in mind. In lists, when you are trying to assign the value like this in the same line, and when you try to change one value, then automatically the second value will also get changed. It will not happen like this. The variable which are holding the same value will hold the value that is changed. This is only in the case of list, not in the case of strings or integers. So when you are trying to perform x is y, we can see that still the value is true, because as I said, the value 1, 2, 3, 4 is now stored in the container and the variable x and y are tagged to it. So that's the reason we can see that we are getting true here. And then when you are performing x is not y, we are getting corresponding false here. So this is what will happen in the case of list. This is a special case, right? One more point that I am going to mention here. Please note that this will only happen in the case when you try to assign the value in the same line. What if you are trying to assign the value separately? Here we are trying to assign the same value to both the variables at the same time, right? But what will happen if you try to assign the value separately? Here you can see that this colon is used to separate two lines. We have already seen this, right? When you are trying to assign multiple variables, we will use colon, right? So that's the reason we are using colon here. So you can see that in this case, I am trying to assign the value 1, 2, 3 to the variable x and the value 1, 2, 3 to the variable y separately. So in this case, what will happen is that the value 1, 2, 3 is stored in some address, and the variable x is tagged to it. In the same way, the value 1, 2, 3 is stored in some another address, and then the variable y is tagged to it. So this is what will happen when you try to assign them differently. Let us try to see the output and confirm this thing. Here we can see in the output, right, the both values are same, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But when you are trying to perform x is y, we can see that we are getting false because they are stored in the separate addresses, because they are assigned separately. So this is the thing which differs from numbers and strings. Numbers and strings. List is a different thing. So keep this in mind. List works differently. And when you are trying to change the value of x, we can see that the value of x is only changed in this case. Now the container is now holding 1, 2, 3 and 7, and which is a variable x with some specific address. But the y remains the same. You can see that when you are trying to print like this, we can see that 1, 2, 3, 7 and then 1, 2, 3. The value of the x and the value of the y. And when you are trying to perform not y, it's absolutely the value should be true because they are stored in the different addresses, and you are saying the same thing, right? Here when you're trying to say not y, you are trying to say the same thing. So that's the reason we are getting that true here. So this is how is and not is operator works. Let us try to see some more operators in the next video.